All right, so we are recording. Hi to everyone. Thank you all for joining today as we are getting a holiday weekend for some people kicked off. I think that a lot of people are off today, including myself, which is nice. So I'm excited to have you all here today. We are here for the Salesforce for Insurance. Although this topic is applied very broadly, right? So we're bringing it into the insurance group so that people could see it, but on migrating permissions. And we have a really cool speaker that's here today, Mike Reynolds. I have some kind of fun facts around Mike that he shared, and I learned some cool things from him when I asked about some bios. So talked about those really quick. Mike is the founder of the Salesforce People Leader User Group, which is fairly new, if I remember correctly. It's come out in about the past year-ish, if I remember right.
Yep.
So definitely check that out if you have not. Give a little plug for you on that one. You also run
Thank
the
you.
Chicago Slack user group.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm going to be doing this as I'm letting people in. You hold 24 certifications. You are officially a Salesforce nerd.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in the 24 certifications that you hold. What was the hardest one to get?
The test that was the worst was actually Slack admin. And it was not because the content was hard. It's because when you take a Slack exam, it stops as soon as you mathematically pass or fail. And so every time you start answering questions, once you get past whatever it is, like 14, then you know you're not that bad. But then once you get past, 50 or 48, you know you're also not that good. So the deeper you get into the exam before it automatically stops, it is kind of toys with you a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And this is a little dear to my heart right now. I actually took an exam last night that I had thought that I was going to study for and didn't. And I went in thinking I am totally going to fail. And Monica had put out on LinkedIn in the last couple of days, which I've heard this before for sure, but fail is like your first attempt in learning, basically. And I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? If I fail this, it's fine. And I did pass, so I was really excited about that. I kind of was a little surprised when it came up and said congratulations, because I was like, I did not prepare for this appropriately. So I guess I knew more than I thought that I did about it. But how many of you failed over the course of the 24? Do you know?
Oh, I don't keep track of that. I'm not one of those people like I've aced everything. That's not true.
Yeah.
The one that I failed the most times, it's not called this anymore, but the Einstein Discovery and Analytics Consultant, the Tab CRM.
Yeah.
That one I failed the most times. I failed that 3 times.
Yeah.
Um, and that content is just spicy.
Yeah. I think it's kind of nice to hear from other people, especially, some of the MVPs and things like that are out there in the world, that we all get a little nervous about taking the exams. And so if you're nervous
Yeah,
about a certain some way, shape, or form, it's
yeah,
okay to fail it. You learn from it, you move on. And that's, yeah. So
yeah.
thank you, Monica, for that little extra word of encouragement this week that I needed last night when I was like, should I just not take this and take the $75 charge? Or anyway, so you live in Chicago, you've got some kids and some cats, it sounds like, hanging out there.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I thought was most interesting is that you are a blacksmith in the 1800s on Saturdays, if I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am a volunteer blacksmith educator at a cultural site called the Grove, and I'm a blacksmith on the weekends in a period accurate 1800s smithy, which is super fun. I don't dress up. I've had a lot of people ask me that. But all of my tools and the processes and the way that I go about it are authentic and it's fun.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, new little nuggets that I've known you for a very long time, and I learned new
Yeah.
nuggets about you. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
All
You
right.
are a multi-talented individual, Michael.
I can, I
A
can
Renaissance man.
very much so.
Um, Awesome. So again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass the torch over to Mike so that he can start presenting now. So I'll stop screen share really quick, but I just appreciate you guys all taking the time. This wouldn't be possible without you all being here. So with that, if you want to take it on, that'd be great.
All right. Can y'all see this?
I can.
Okay, cool. So I'll just preface this with I really can't see you, so come off mute and yell at me. I'm not one of those people that gets upset about being interrupted. I don't care about that at all. So again, my name is Mike Reynolds. I'm a director of the Salesforce practice at Captech. We're a consulting company. I'm not going to talk about Captech anymore. I might make a forward-looking statement. I don't work for Salesforce. Don't trust me. Don't buy anything because I said it was a good idea. So what we're going to do is talk about permissions and kind of some of the changes that are around the corner and what we need to do to be able to deal with these changes. They're not necessarily the friendliest changes in the world, but you may have heard about a year ago, they announced the end of life of having a permission reside in the profile. And that's different from saying that the profile is going away. It is not, right? But there will be a point in time in the future where you can't have your permission in that profile. So we're going to have to change things. And what I propose is that we approach this problem using this idea of a persona and persona-based access. It works pretty well, scales pretty well, particularly in environments where you have SOX or SOC auditing going on, which I believe many of you may. So it's the kind of thing that's going to really help in being able to deal with an audit, being able to deal with a constant ever-evolving user base, and then being able to deal with these rather important, large managed packages, which are FSC or Health Cloud or anything industries, right? And so we're going to cover it kind of in these 3 steps. So we'll start out. What is a persona? Why should I care? So I'm a big definitions person. Just what is it, right? Merriam-Webster's got an idea. And this sort of works for me. But I think if we think about it within the context of Salesforce, we can actually simplify this even a bit more and just literally say, well, what do you do all day in this Salesforce org, right? What are you doing? And when I talk to customers about this, this is essentially the only question I ask, and I ask it over and over and over again. Because when you get into what a person does all day, you can figure out what they actually need to do, and you can figure out what they need access to. This is very, very different from a job. And I want to spend some time on this. Jobs, people love their job titles. They're so in love with their job title. And their job title makes them unique. It makes them special, right? But the odds are they're not very unique, but their job title is, right? And all job titles are made up anyway, so we shouldn't really focus on that, right? So I have this example of this from my own past. I worked in a call center, and there were about 1,200 people in this building using my Salesforce org for telephony. 200 of them were customer service representatives, and they did like 50 or 60 different functions. They were hyper specialized. And across those 50 people, or those 200 people with their 50 different functions, there were probably 50 job titles. It was wild. Across the other 1,000, though, there were a lot of job titles, probably just as many. But really, all those job titles boiled down to 2 different things: the inbound call representative and the outbound call representative. And everybody thought that they were special. There were tons of sub teams. They worked out of different queues. They worked out of different things. But if you take a big step back and you look at it, all 1,000 of those people were exactly the same. What they did, right? That central question of how we approach this, what do you do, was all the same, right? I get a phone call or I make a phone call. It's all the same permission. I work cases. I need to see accounts. I need to see contacts. I need to be able to see this set of custom objects to do what the company did. Cool. It was all the same, right? What they do was the same. So why do I care about this idea of the persona, right? Why do I care what people do? Well, personas become the tool that we have that helps us actually see what the need for permissions access is. So I think about the persona in the same way that I think about your role within the role hierarchy, right? I don't care what your position is within the organization. I care about what your data access needs are. And because I know what your data access need is, I can fit you into the right spot in my role hierarchy. Well, the same thing's going to be true with personas and the persona-based approach to permissions. If I know what your persona is, I will be able to fit you into the permissions model in a very neat way. So I'm going to get into this a little bit. How do we approach the problem? And this is a little interactive. So I'm going to beg some of you to unmute and actually talk to me. But if we were to think about these two kind of simple personas, the sales persona and the service persona, somebody just shout out, what do you think is unique about the sales persona, right? What is unique or special, or the sales persona would do this, and I would expect it to be something that maybe the service persona does not do. Anybody?
Pricing?
Yeah, right. I would not expect a service person to go in and be editing amounts, right? So there's certainly a clear space on the sales persona side where there's going to be some permissions that are not shared, right? I could do the same thing on the service side, right? In fact, the ability to really manage cases, right? On the service side, sure. On the sales side, no, probably not.
Yep,
Right.
I'm reading a couple of your chats as well that we're getting. So handling cases versus opportunities, creating quotes, or
Exactly.
op
Right.
record. Yeah.
But I've got on the screen, right, there are obvious common elements here. So as we begin to think about what the persona-based approach is, we can start to very quickly see that there are needs that are common, and then there are needs that are independent. The sad thing is, and I will happily admit this, if you start adding more, like if I were to add dozens of these personas, it's going to get very difficult. It's going to get really difficult, actually, to clearly decide what sits at the core and what sits out on the fringe. Where's my comfortable overlap and what's outside of it? And so this is when when I talk about this, I have to put up this big statement slide. And I put this up specifically because of a guy that I'd love to argue with. If you've ever been on MVP office hours, you'll know this, Squire Kirshner. He and I had a really good conversation about this. And what is very fair to say here is this is an approach. This is an idea. You can take the idea and apply it to your org, and it'll be perfect. But it'll look different than the way I apply it in mine. That doesn't mean yours is wrong or that mine is right. It means that there's nuance to your business. So just as your Salesforce instance is unique in and to itself, so will everybody else's. So what you want to take away from this is the idea, and then you want to be able to shift the idea into what it needs to be for your org. So take everything with a grain of salt. If you have a specific question, just ask me, right? It's usually not as complicated as people want to make it. So we'll be able to get pretty nitty gritty about it. Okay, so what's the model? How do we do this, right? How do I build a persona? This is pretty simple. We're going to do it with 3 parts, okay? We have this base permission set. The base permission set is the one that you will be able to build the fastest. It's the easiest because it's the most boring, right? Base permissions. Think about the base permission set as being something I can really broadly apply. Probably everybody within my org. Maybe you're a really big environment and you've got no way to unify things. You might be saying that in your head. Well, Base permission set is probably just system permissions. It's going to be boring stuff, right? Like, can you run flows? Are you a Lightning experience user? Right? These are things that we're not going to argue about across the company. It's pretty much universal, right? Boring stuff. That's what we start with. Base permission set, very, very simple. This next one is really, really important. It is a read level permission set. Now, this is the whole UI. Okay. And it's going to be a really big swath of your org, right? So if I were to think about all of sales, right? Or I think about all of a claims advisor, right? These massive roles where there are dozens and dozens and dozens of objects, different things. Great. Pull all that in, but at the read level only. That's critical. Read level only. I do not want to give anybody the ability to edit anything, and I certainly want to exclude anything sensitive, right? So if you have PCI, PHI, anything that we have an initial for, right? Maybe your base PII, if everyone in your company knows it, like first name, last name, stuff like that. I let everybody see that, fine. But if you've got social security number, we are certainly not including that in the read permission set, right?
Mike, I think what you're saying is view all is different than read all.
Haha, yes, absolutely. And I will almost never recommend that the view all or read all be here, because when we talk about persona-based permissions modeling, there's only that permission, the ability to view all and modify all, or on an object level that read all. We don't want to give those out because they have sharing implications. And so I would almost never put that here because I don't want to inadvertently solve or cause a secondary problem. If we really, really simplify and we say that Salesforce is an Excel spreadsheet in the sky, permissions deals with what columns and what tabs you can see, right? What tables of data can you access and what columns on those tables? It has nothing to do with rows, and rows are where you get the actual data, right? So I try to stay away from the view all, or if I do, it goes in this last level permission set, which what I call the persona permission set. Persona permission sets where you put anything risky. So if somebody does have the ability to see a social security number, or they do have the ability to view all, it goes here. Does that help?
It does help, and I just want to point out what Mike is saying is it's all safe harbor. I'm putting words into Mike's head, and because I'm doing that, I'll put my face out here so that people can know that I'm saying this. He is not saying you should do this. He is saying this is a framework to think about when you're doing it.
Yes.
Because
yes.
When you say things like that base permission set is boring and everyone will have this base permission set, that's not really what Mike is going to do.
I'll get as close to that as I can, but there will be people that do not get it, or I might have more than one base.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you are, and I can put some real teeth behind this, right? Let's say you're Amazon, right? Amazon is not a customer of mine. I have not configured their org. I'm making an assumption about their 190 Salesforce orgs. Amazon is going to have a more complicated version of this when the dust has settled than most of you, right? Now, on the flip side of that, I do have a Fortune 10 customer, and they have several orgs. And in one of those orgs, I've implemented this model, and they have one base permission set. They're a healthcare company. They have a lot of sensitive stuff, but there is one floor for that entire org because it works.
And they have
there may be another.
And they have no integration profiles then.
Um, I would deal with integrations in an independent way,
Okay.
right? So yeah, when you talk about the integrations, if an integration is set up the way that I would recommend, where an integration has a dedicated user, then you can build a permission set that is single use for that dedicated user in the exact same way that you would have an OAuth scope that is dedicated that I build and I use it for one thing, right? I'm okay with that in that specific instance, right? Because there's no harm to your system. We would want to make sure that we don't just toss things in there, but this model will help you support that integration in the long run, and we'll see why in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah,
I
is
have
everybody? Yeah, yeah.
One thing to comment on this. When
Sure.
you're talking about that base permission set, that's somewhere to be very, very careful. Run flows is not a permission that I would give to my users. That each flow should be permissioned separately and part of your personas, because it's a very dangerous permission set. But
Yeah, in your
as
org,
a
that might be the
security
right
perspective,
decision.
it's a very dangerous
Yeah.
permission. I just
No,
wanted to point that out, because if people just think, oh yeah, I'm just going to put run flows there, it's not, I think, ideal
yeah,
from a
it really,
Flow-natic perspective.
yeah, no, it really, really depends on your environment. Again, that other customer that I had, we put run flows in the base, and that wasn't a risk, but they also had no external users. They had, it was a sales and service
Right,
org
right.
that
Yeah,
just
that's, I just
happened
wanted to
to,
caution on that one, because if people see that, just say, oh yeah,
yeah,
I just
I
want to do
mean,
that.
it's everything that's in there. I mean, Lightning Experience user is still controversial if you go to the right org,
Mhm.
right? And so it's like even
Those
view
are just
public list
examples,
views.
right?
Yeah, these are examples. They'll typically, I would say that's probably fair. They do typically apply, right? Most of the time. But will you find an instance where it shouldn't be there? Yeah, to your point, 100%, totally, right? Like when I talk about this, I'm not joking. Like your org is unique and special, and your model will reflect the specific needs of your org.
Yep.
And
Okay.
just to give context, and then I'll shut up.
Okay.
When we did an export of our profile, and we thought it was just like a really base, boring profile. We got 30,000 lines of XML in the download, of dozens and dozens and dozens of things that when we looked at, it's like, yeah, these are like access to the help area, like just stuff that, like, well, what's the
Yeah.
risk? It's not necessarily that every profile needs it, but what's the risk of just having it
Right.
in base? Like it
Yeah.
may not matter. No one's gonna put up a fight for that.
Right.
But that's a lot of stuff. 30,000 lines of code just in the base profile.
Right. And so it helps to see, like, okay, I have these 3 building blocks, now what? Right. So how we use these is going to help explain why we need them. But these are the 3 essential pieces that we need. So let's talk about the how, right? If we go back to this and we say, okay, I'm going to start with this idea of I've done some mapping. I think I understand who my personas are. If we split these and say, okay, well, every persona is now actually going to be a permission set group. Okay. Each person that I identify has a persona, and that persona is a permission set group. I can now build things into the model. I can go somewhere with this, right? So if you were starting from scratch, you would use an empty profile, and it's going to have defaults in it. There's some stuff that can only live in a profile. That stuff will live in your profile. Some of that stuff, probably the most important bits, are going to be your defaults and things that are tightly coupled to the profile, right? There's some stuff that I can only assign it to you once. Everything I can only assign once is going to live in your profile. It's going to be that way forever. I don't think Salesforce even has a solution to that as a conceptual problem on the roadmap because they don't need to solve that problem. But permissions, literally anything that can go in a permission set is going to have to move off eventually, right? So I have these profiles, or I have these personas. We know that the persona is going to be a permission set group. So essentially the first thing I'm going to do, and with these 3 personas in our made up org, we'll be able to get away with is taking that company base and reusing it across all of them, right? Because this is essentially the floor. It's going to apply to everybody. And I don't want to have to go through and give you access to Lightning if you're in sales, access to Lightning if you're in persona, or marketing, access to Lightning if you're over here. Like, I can just do that once. And then I can reuse it over and over and over again. After that, I want to think about that read level. And here I begin to have some distinction, right? The marketing and sales side, they're actually looking at the same stuff as a base from a read perspective. Service is different. Service, you know, they've got all sorts of other stuff that is necessary that they need to see. And so they have a different one. If I built out my marketing in such a way that they were also truly unique, well, maybe they could have a different one. But in this example, I'm kind of keeping it simple. Marketing and sales can share the same persona or read permission set within their personas. Service gets a unique one. And then the last step, everybody's going to have their own independent persona level permission set because there's stuff that marketing can do that nobody else can do. Right? Same is going to be true for service and sales. When I'm done with that, I'm going to officially call these permission set groups. And essentially, that's the model, and that's how it ends up looking. A couple of things that are worth noting here. Access to, let's say, the account object. It's going to be in here and in here. It's duplicative. And I know that, and it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What you don't want to do is over specify the read level permission set. The ramifications of doing that are going to mean you end up with a lot more read level permission sets than you actually want, right? Might you need to have smaller than like a whole cloud? Yeah, maybe, right? And that's okay. But don't get down to the point of like, okay, well, here's read for account. Here's read for contact. That's too small. And if we go one-on-one, I don't think you'll be able to justify it, right? Certainly not across your entire org, right? We want these to be pretty big and pretty UI rich because that's going to really help. So one of the benefits of this model, and this is something that will really help when we start to think about anybody who's in an industry, is that I can maintain my build in all of these. And then let's say you also have some Pardot users, right? Or whatever they call it. The permission set's still called Pardot user. I can take that Pardot user permission set and put it in this marketing persona permission set group. And then I can forget about Pardot. I don't actually care about it anymore. I don't care if they put an update and they change things behind the curtain like they did with FSL about a year ago. They relabeled the permission that gives you access to field service under the hood, like just in the metadata. Why did they do that? I don't know, but they did it. And you know what? It didn't matter because the FSL user permissions were just inside the personas that I needed them to be in. And so everything was just happy. It just scaled. It was fine. I do not duplicate the managed package permissions. I just include them in the personas that need them. Right? Can you also just assign them to individual users? Sure, that's fine. But if it's persona scoped, put it in the permission set group. For most of the people on the call, that's a big one, right? Then the question comes in, what happens if I get a new persona, right? Because this always happens. We realized we needed a new persona. And I'll give you my favorite for this example is, what if you get legal? They show up, they've decided they're now Salesforce users, and they show up and they say, we need to be able to see everything. And you say, okay, well, what do you do? Right? Because I don't care what you tell me. I want to know what you do. They're like, oh, well, we got to be able to look over everybody's shoulder. We got to be able to see everything. We got to be able I need full access, everything. Right? That's what they're going to say because they're attorneys. Well, do they actually need to see social security number? Probably not. Do they need to see the private health information that we may be in possession of or see actual account numbers? Probably not. So what do they really need? Right? Well, based on what they do, they said they needed to see stuff. So it sounds like they need some read level permission sets and probably the company base. And so without any additional build, with the exception of their persona permission set group, I can get them all the access they need. This then scales, right? 3 months from now, I've created a couple of new fields for my sales team and a new field for service, maybe a new app, a new whatever. But I maintained this model. I updated the ability to read things. And so the legal persona got maintained for free. No one ever wrote a user story that said, hey, make sure that that legal can see this new field. But the model supported that. That's why models are so cool, right? When you implement this, it helps you maintain your environment going forward so that you don't spend as much time playing whack-a-mole. And the place we don't want to find ourselves is someplace where I have, 500 permission sets. They're all super specific. And I'm checking some massive Excel spreadsheet to try to figure out which type of user needs what permission set. And then I have some new build. So I have to figure out where in my messy collection of access do I add the new access? Because your customer's never going to tell you, right? That service team or that claims team, they're never going to come out and say, hey, the access needs to be here, here, and here. They're going to tell you, as a claims agent, I need the ability to blah, 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 so that I can blah, blah, blah. I know that I'm done win test, right? Well, if that's all you get, then they told you what they needed, because as a user is really as a persona. So the way that we do the work is going to help us maintain the model, which is going to actually produce a better result than them just telling us what they wanted anyway. So this is really stable. It works, it scales. What I do every time I give this talk, if you want the deck, you can scan this. It's a simple form. Just basically give me your email address and your name. I'll connect with you on LinkedIn in case you have questions, and then I'll email you a copy of the deck. It also lets my boss know that I didn't actually just ask for an hour off without doing any work. So I appreciate you filling it out. And then I can answer any questions you have. Or I can go back and we can talk about other things if you want to argue with me, Stu, that's fine.
I just love it. I think you're the organization, it's very simple to understand, and it is like having little I don't know, like an organizational structure. You're just giving us, a model, which I really
Yeah.
like.
It's just a blueprint.
Yeah.
Right. And
Awesome.
again, it's like the value of having that blueprint is that it becomes predictable. And the predictability is what's giving you what you really need to actually figure out what to do next, right? Because how much of the time do you go, okay, well, this type of user, and we immediately follow up with, okay, give me an actual user. Because if you don't give me the real user, I don't really know who you're talking about. And when we find ourselves in that position, the pain point we're experiencing is actually this fact that we haven't really identified who our user is. So we ask for give me their user ID, give me their exact name. And that's I experienced that for so long where I had It was literally like as a something user, and then they would, in parentheses, give me a username. And that was my standard because I never knew who we were really talking about. Because, everybody's got their fancy job titles. You don't really know what people do. And it was just always a nightmare. And then when the thing that tipped this for me was actually before the announcement. It was an internal audit where they came back and they were like, you need to be able to justify everybody's access to everything. And I did a quick export, and I had like 350 different job titles on my user object. And based on job title or department or role or profile, there was no consistency. And I went to one team that was literally, there were 10 people on the team, and there were 7 different configurations of permissions across those 10 people.
That's
And
what
I
I
was
was going to
like,
ask is, do you have tips for detangling once you've already, for those of us that have 10-year-old orgs, or many people on this call have, lots and lots and lots of profiles.
so earlier I said one of the things we don't want to do is confuse the record access problem with the permissions problem. Another thing we want to not do is try to solve the profile problem with permissions. And the profile problem of I have too many profiles, that's an opinion, right? If you tell me you have 1,000, I will agree with you, but then I'll still point out that we have an opinion on our hands. Sure, you can get that number down, but like, what's the point? If the problem you're trying to solve is the permissions problem, let's implement this, and then we'll back into a better solution on the profiles later. And the reason why I say that is there's a ton of stuff that is not actually on the profile that is profile dependent. A simple example is a flexi page. So if you export the metadata for a flexi page, you're going to see all this permissions override, or now I'm doubting what it says. It's something profile override or something like that. And what it does is it's the mapping of this form factor to this profile. If you go through and do Lightning app activation and you activate it to a profile, it's going to create that, and it puts it in the flexi page. It doesn't put it in the profile. So you can export your profile like Stu did and end up with 30,000 lines. And that is 30,000 that lived on the profile. Every Lightning record page you have has more, right? Or could have more. So the profile problem is a different one. When you actually go to implement this, the easiest way to implement it is to forget about solving the profile problem and go back to it later. So what I recommend is pick a profile, and it's going to have several personas. Build the model for all of those personas. And when you're done, when every person has been tested thoroughly, and yes, the access is there, right? Because what you'll do in your sandbox, you'll remove all the permissions from that profile, in essence, breaking everybody, but leaving the profile dependencies that reside outside of the profile metadata. You'll leave all of those in place and intact because you'll keep that profile there. All your defaults are accurate. All of your off-profile dependencies are in place, and you can test the specific thing you built, which is just a remodel of permissions. When that looks good for everybody, then you go in and you hollow out that profile with everything that you moved into the permission set model. And then everything will still work. Once that's done for your whole company, then you'll be in a totally different spot, because you'll be like, okay, we have too many profiles and we have a permissions model. Now I can start to look at my read, and I can say, how do I get to a point where I've activated all of my Lightning record pages to maybe the app that we're in, instead of relying on that profile? Once you've done that, and you've gone through and removed all the other dependencies to the profile, because you can have them in code, you can have them in custom purpose, you can have them everywhere. Once you've solved all of those problems, then you start reducing the number of profiles based on the only thing that's left, which is what are those defaults, right? What's your default app? Can I consolidate based on that, right? Does that help?
Yeah, those dependencies are going to be a problem for a lot of people.
They're spicy. They're
Yeah.
not easy. Like, and depending on your org, depending on your scale, I've had some customers where they're like, oh, we have too many profiles. We have 20. And I'm like, okay. That's all. And then you get another customer and they're like, we're not too bad on our profiles. We've got about 100, but that's okay. And I'm like, okay. Because each one of our orgs is so tailored. It's so unique, right? What do you really need? Right? Like I was just talking to a friend who's at a big nationwide insurance company, and she just wants to solve this for 2 business units first. And across those 2 business units, there's like 30 or 40 profiles. And they're like, okay, we're down to a reasonable number. And I'm like, okay. Because what makes the number of profiles actually a burden? It's the cost of administering those profiles. If it's mapped and, like if you have a good streamlined auto user provisioning and deprovisioning, then I don't really see the problem. It's just data, right? Like it's not actually a burden. Having 50 or 100 doesn't make that number good or bad. It's what's the implications of having that number, and that's purely like an administrative thing, right? If you're troubleshooting all day because you can't figure it out and your teams are a mess, like, okay, well, that's different, right? Any other questions? I can't see the chat.
I don't have any questions in the chat open now, but that doesn't mean that they can't come.
All right, cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was incredibly informative, for sure. For sure. This was great. And you recently did this at Trailhead DX, correct?
I did. Yeah, I did this at TDX, the exact same presentation, just less about managed packages.
Yeah.
So, but yeah,
That was great. Thank you.
yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you for coming.
Well, hopefully everyone was able to grab that QR code and can give some feedback. That would be wonderful. And I appreciate all of the time for today. Mike, thank you again for joining us. And I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend.
Of course. Thanks. Y'all have a good weekend too.
All
Bye,
right.
Good to see you,
everybody.
Mike.
Thanks.
All right,
It's
yeah,
really
good seeing you,
insightful.
Dave.
Thank you.
All right, cheers. Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.